Our first session, it's our job to warm up the house here. Our first session, I'm going to be chatting with Frank Levinson. Frank, why don't you come up on stage? Frank is the managing director of Small World Group Incubator. He works with us in our Impact Incubator program where he mentors, incubates, invests in social enterprises. And we're here to talk today about how to invest in inclusion. Really going from niche to mass, how we can take this sector from where it is today and make it even bigger. So this is meant to be an informal chat.
I think we're wedged now between Michael Jackson and Yusha. This is not exactly individual space. Let's sit down.
Great.
So one of the things I wanted to start off with today, let's see, is that on? No, doesn't matter. That is to think about how far it's come in my lifetime. You know, I'm sure you've all heard this quaint story about guys that, kids that grew up in the 1950s in the USA, hearing about the starving children in India and China and forced to eat their whatever they didn't like on their plate. But that actually was my life. That's where I was. And in a sense, I look back on that now and I realize what was bred into me at the time was pity and charity was what was needed, as opposed to inclusion. That's the real action that made a difference in these 60 years of my life. And in a sense, what inclusion means is we change people from needing pity and charity to being contributors, which is what we're doing in our incubator. We're starting companies around ideas and we're focusing on the needs of this region here. We're, a 4-hour plane ride from countries from here that have half the world's population, something like that. And the other thing we're doing, and I've been saying this quietly to people, is I think it's important that we find ways to make profitable businesses whose main customers are the poor. And the reason is because if we do that, we're going to bring services to them. We're going to bring things that they need, and we're going to do it in a business-like way that creates a new future. That's what the cell phone did. Nobody envisioned prepaid contracts and $10 cell phones and things like that. But Nokia made it happen, and it's changed the world as we gave people communications. They could stop being cheated on what was a fair price for the vegetables they were selling at the market because they could use their phone to check what was fair. So I think this inclusion thing is something that in my 60 years I've really seen be a big difference. And I'm glad for the change.
I think one of the key elements when we talk about investing in inclusion and investable businesses and moving from charity to investment is making sure that the businesses we're investing in are creating real value, that they're not reliant necessarily on subsidy, but they're creating real value. We can then have a debate about whether, as Muhammad Yunus in the social business context would say, all of that value and any dividends have to stay in the company, be reinvested, whether they should, as Wayne and others were suggesting, we find a way to make sure the beneficiary target group is included in exits and also benefits from that, or whether that is a return for an impact investor. So we can, but it all starts from having a model that is actually creating viable economic value. I think when we talk about impact investing, we also want to go a step beyond that and make sure that the companies not only are creating value, but are keeping in mind the mission from that they start with, and making sure that everything they do is, while financially sustainable, is also contributing to the realization of the mission and actually ensuring that that's helping the beneficiaries. We've seen a lot of growth in this sector over time, and one of the questions we have is how do we keep this growing? How do we move from where we are, a group that's in this room that knows about this, and how do we take this on and grow it from niche to mass? How do we get more and more people involved in the sector? What do you think are some of the things that need to happen for that too?
So we invest, as you know, both in purely for-profit companies, high-tech startups, through incubation schemes that are partnerships here in Singapore, but also in social ones. But in every case, we use the same methodology. We want to make sure that first of all, and I think this is really helpful to understand, I get about 100 proposals a month for funding. I discard 80 of them right away. They're just, they don't make sense. I mean, crazy people will ask for money. It's one of those things that happens in this world. But of the 20 that remain, 10 of them don't fit our investment model. They don't fit the technologies we can help you with and so on. But I know all the other incubators here in Singapore, and I send those 10 to the right guys and say, look, hey, this is something I think is interesting, but it's not for us. Of the 10 that remain, we'll likely try to engage with all 10, but we'll at most fund one every 2 months. That's sort of the rate at which we do things. So we are in the business of saying no a lot. So if we engage with you, though, so the first step is if we engage with you, it's because we think you are interesting. We can't fund everything we see, but we hope through that interaction that we're not wasting our time, that we're giving you ideas, we're giving you suggestions, things to take back. We have templates and say, look, don't just have your business plan run on and on for pages and do this and this. Here's a template. Try to pour your ideas into this template and see if that'll work. So in many ways, we try to make just even the interaction, even if it fails, something that rises it up, because that's part of going from niche to mass market. And then the second thing is we really try to make sure we get focus. It's so easy, especially in the social space, because very often we're brought cases where people are dying if we don't fix this problem. And so they present the problem, but very quickly they fractionalize it and say, well, we need to do this for water here, but we need to do this, and we need to do this, and we need to do this. And we go, no, you can't do all that. And they go, but if we don't do that, people will die. I go, well, I know, but if we do all those things only 80% well, then they're all going to die anyway because we didn't get anything actually done. So we try to say, look, focus on just this one. We think this is the best. You can say it's this one. We'll work with you. We'll maybe change, but we've researched with you. We think it's this one, but if you focus, we'll help you through funding, through partnerships, to get at least that one fully done, and in a way selling to people so that you can be profitable. So try to understand when you interface with an investor, they're in the business of saying no, even though you think you're trying to get the yes, and then they're going to want you to focus and really try to work with them in that way.
Yeah, so I think the message I'm hearing is that a social enterprise needs to meet many of the same criteria a traditional business, maybe all the same criteria a traditional business meets, and then more, and then it has to do good on top of that. So it's a hard business. It's hard. I think entrepreneurship is hard, and social entrepreneurship is even harder. I think one of the things that's interesting is a Small World Group is not purely a social investor. Not every investment you make is in a social enterprise or has a mission focus, but you've made a very conscious effort to try to do, I think you've made a pledge, but even more than that, made a very conscious effort to focus a substantial portion of your investment on companies that do have a social mission. Tell us a little bit about that thinking, that evolution, what went into that, and
So I'm at the stage of my life where giving back is important. I mean, it's something that matters to me. But just to quantify it, we get 6-to-1 matching for doing seed funding for non-social ventures. So when we do a social venture, it costs us a lot more of our own cash personally, and we take a lot more risk. So we really believe in you when we get that far. And so when I committed to doing 2 yesterday, it's a disproportionate, in the next 2 in the next year, it's a disproportionate, in some sense, amount of what we'll do. We do some things that end up to be social ventures in our actual technology space too, and I talked about a couple yesterday, and you can find out about them. But again, to the extent we can find those things where we do both, even we love that even better. And for the moment, we're mainly doing them out of Singapore. So these will be Singapore-based companies because we're here. But we're open to looking at outside of here as well.
Right. I like, when I think about moving from this movement from a niche movement to a mass movement, I mean, one of the things we spend a lot of time on is bringing more investors into the space. And I think this market has been led by foundations like the Ilios Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, who have, I think, quite naturally said, we're in the business of doing good, and let's make sure we do that not only with our granting, our donor policy, but also with our investing policy. And I think that's been then followed. The next set of pioneers were a group of high net worth individuals who said, let's do that in our personal investing. We wear one hat, we invest and make money. We wear another hat, we give to philanthropic causes. Let's see how we can marry those. So we're marrying our investing with the philanthropic causes that we care about. And I think that insight, that desire to not have a completely bifurcated process between investing and giving parts of your mind or parts of your wallet is an insight that actually has a lot of potential, and frankly, there's no reason that needs to stop with foundations or high net worth individuals. So it's very encouraging when I see a formal incubator saying, yeah, I can do that too. I don't need to only do one type of investing. I can make sure I'm doing part of that. And we're starting to see that. We've seen Satish from Venture East yesterday. His fund is not specifically a social fund, and yet I think they find themselves consciously doing quite a lot of impact investing. They say there's no reason we can't do both of those. And I also think there's no reason that this is limited to people with great means. We think Kiva has shown that there's no reason we should be looking at only people who can invest $1 million or $100,000 or even $25,000 in an opportunity. People who can invest $1,000 or $100 to help a social enterprise want to do that. They see that same compelling reason to marry their philanthropic convictions with their investment activities.
What you've been good at too is when you put together a funding for a social venture like we did for Bogosphere, we had some smaller ones and some larger ones, but the people that each brought more than money. And it was that collection of investors, I think, that made the Bogosphere thing stronger overall. Some people locally that were doing things in the Philippines in the investment space, some here that had some knowledge about some of the technology or other things they were trying to do. I thought that was, and I thought, IX was particularly helpful in creating that meeting place for us to get together, that square, that marketplace for us to meet as friends, but to go do something together.
Yeah, and that was a great deal. That was a relatively small amount of capital, and yet I think by bringing together that investment group, we had a Small World Group incubator, but also an accelerator in the Philippines. We had an individual from Singapore investing through his philanthropic foundation. We had other individuals investing, so it was I think a great example of that. One of the other trends I see in this space, which is very interesting, is that a lot of the funds, a lot of the established social venture funds are backed by, they may be operating here, but they're backed by Western investors, whether it's the DFIs, the World Bank, the IFC, or Western philanthropists. And that's fantastic. They're doing a lot of great work. But I think the other trend we've seen is that we're seeing a huge amount of interest from Asian individuals. When we deal with individuals, there's interest from the US, there's interest from Europe, but the most interest we're seeing are from people who are here. People in Singapore, people in Hong Kong, people in Mumbai, people in Jakarta, who actually want to get involved just as individuals into this space. And I think that is a paradigm shift and something we want to see just continuing growing.
I think one of the things too we've seen is that people go to the U.S., they start a company, they do things, again, and then they come back here having been successful, and they bring all that knowledge and skill with them. And so I think that's also been successful. Several of our partners in our incubator here in Singapore worked for HP for a long time, and they picked up all the sort of HP way. I mean, they literally had met Bill and Dave and speak reverence about that sort of thing. But for them, they manage really large teams, and so they think in terms of when they see these little companies, how do I apply all that skill and all the training that people gave me, and how do I now go do it here? So.
Right. It's one of the questions I sometimes get asked is how, is Asia behind in impact investing? And I think in the West is a little bit ahead, but we're fast catching up. One of the interesting things I think, though, to point out is that the impact investing, which is really a venture capital type investing model today, just given the stage of the industry, we should realize that up until recently, Asia has not had a venture capital culture. So it's not just that in social enterprise investing, impact investing, we're a little behind, but we haven't had the same, We don't have Silicon Valley out here, but that's starting to change. I mean, I think you're part of that vanguard, and it's starting to change here in Singapore. It's starting to change in India. It's starting to change throughout the region. But it's still got there's still a long way till we're where Silicon Valley is.
We talked about it. I think the wrong question is how do we make the next Silicon Valley in Singapore? How do we make U.S. philanthropy or U.S. Social investing work here? I just think it's absolutely the wrong question. We're going to reinvent it here, and it's going to have a distinctly Asian flavor, and it's let me just clear this up. It's not going to be led by old white guys. Okay, that's part of it for sure too. And to the extent that I can release those things that I bring with me and say, okay, I know some things, but you guys know some things. One of the models that clearly is working over here, and Virginia Cha talks about it, is I like to call it the pirates of Shenzhen. I mean, they have this model of starting companies by taking something they really admire and copying it, and forget the patents and everything else, and see how we go. Well, okay, but it's a long-term cultural thing. There are things from hundreds of years ago where they had honor in those pirates. They were sort of the Robin Hoods of this hemisphere.
And in a way, the nice thing is in the social enterprise space, that concept of copying, while respecting intellectual property, the idea of replicating something across boundaries is something that the community embraces, actually.
But making it better. I mean, they have a sincere commitment to making it better. It's not just to copy it. But nevertheless, they start with a different mindset. And I think, as we let some of these things have their day, I think we'll find that we make our own progress here.
No, that's right. And my point is simply that in a world where each enterprise is not, I think one of the distinguishing factors of social enterprise is that you're not trying to capture all of the value within the company. You're actually trying to create more value that leaks out intentionally to your stakeholders. And that in that kind of context, that kind of mindset, we see enterprises like Selco that has developed a model that's working in the state in India where they're working. And they've said, we're happy if people learn from us, copy us, come on in, we'll show you how to do it, and develop it in other states of India, bring it to Indonesia. And so there's a real collaborative spirit and a real sense of how do we create the most value. And so that copying culture actually works perfectly in this space. And so we'd probably want to encourage that more. Now I'm being told we've got just about 2 minutes left, so we'll keep chatting as long as we have, but we're also happy to take any questions from the audience, if there are any. There are microphones set up. I think the last thing that I would like to ask Frank is how or who else should we bring into this space, and how do we do that?
So one of the things that to me I see so clearly, and I don't know how we do it, so I'll leave it a challenge for the audience, but is Singapore really is the hub. And they talk it here. They say, we want to be this hub. We want you to come and make your regional hub here in Singapore. But most of the time, the investment money they have is for here. And in some sense, the Silicon Valley play is not that. It is really, how are we going to do something for the world? We want the largest market, the biggest vision we can possibly handle. And so I'd say, the one thing I would try to bring here is how do we reach outside of Singapore? There are hundreds of millions of people around us. We're 5 million people here. And the amount of impact you can have on the hundreds of millions is much larger. And Singapore is a country, in some sense, the most Western of any around here. I mean, there's a full electric grid. We never worry about power going out. We don't worry about how we're going to get around and whether we can get to work or any of those things. Those are all problems around us. So I think, those problems are opportunities, right? Those are things we could solve. And we don't have to solve them in the way the West did. We solved it here. There's a power grid. But there's potential for distributed power grids. There's potential for distributed wastewater handling and so on. We don't have to use the U.S. model. We did here. And I think as we take that challenge, I think there's tons of social and entrepreneurial ventures that could be started that'll be highly profitable.
And I think that's a great place to end. We're going to spend the rest of the morning plenary with some focus on Singapore. So I will end there. Thank you very much, Frank.